Welcome into this week's episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. I am your host, Matt Kirchner. We asked and you delivered. And when we say that, we wanted to hear your questions. We wanted to hear questions from the world of STEM and technical education. What do you want to know and how can we answer it? We got so many great questions from members of our audience. We weren't able to pick every single one of them, of course, but we did pick some key ones for this episode of the podcast, Ask Us Anything. An introduction of sorts to our audience. Most of you are familiar with Melissa Martin, who produces the podcast every single week. I call Melissa the heart of the Tech Ed Podcast. This was her idea to begin with. She does all the heavy lifting. I just get to ask the questions. So, Melissa, awesome to have you here. Welcome to that side of the microphone.
Yeah, thanks, man. It's fun to be on this side of the microphone.
Absolutely. So you're going to be asking some questions, and we'll talk about them back and forth.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm really excited.
Got a lot of great ones.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, so this is super exciting. Thank you, everyone, for submitting your questions. This will be a regular occurring segment that we have on the podcast. So if you are listening and you have other questions, you can submit them at any time, and we'll compile them for next Ask Us Anything. But we'll kick off this one. We've got a lot of really great questions that are surrounding advice for students, and we get a lot of those. We like to talk about advice for students on the podcast every single week. So These are some really great questions. And the first one comes from Maroon Namey. And Maroon asks, how do we promote non-traditional professions to students and maybe even educators and counselors as early as elementary school?
Yeah, really, really important question. And thank you, Maroon, for that one. I would start with this, and we say this all the time on the podcast. This has absolutely been proven. It is undeniable that a young person's career interests actually start forming as early as middle school and in some cases as early as elementary school. And so the first thing to keep in mind is that this is especially true for girls as they are fourth, fifth grade. In some cases, it's not that they're deciding this is the career that I want to have, but they are starting to decide, well, maybe this career isn't for me. Maybe an engineering career or a career in public safety or a career in manufacturing isn't for me because those are, quote, boys' jobs. That is a horrible way to think about it, but it's true. Students do start thinking about career choices as early middle school and even elementary school, which is why Maroon's question is so important. And that means, how do we get to students early on? Well, let's look at a manufacturing career. Maybe we have a career in industrial maintenance. Maybe we're working around actuators and solenoids and programmable logic controllers. Look, we're not going to take a fourth grader, Melissa, and put them in front of a PLC trainer and teach them ladder logic, right? That's not the way we do it. But we can start teaching them some of the basic foundational technologies. Maybe they start learning about biotechnology. Maybe they start learning about careers in transportation. Maybe it's simple opportunities to learn about careers in advanced manufacturing by visiting a local manufacturing facility. I still promote and tie my decision to go into manufacturing in some part to an experience I had when I was in fifth grade. And that was when we went and visited the Koss headphone manufacturing facility, if you're familiar with Koss headphones. And I stood in front of a big vibratory deburring bowl, and I saw them deburring the top of the headphone. And I just thought that was so fascinating. Is it any coincidence, maybe not, that come 15 years later or so, I was actually leading one of the largest contract manufacturing companies in North America. And guess what we were doing? We were, in addition to all kinds of plating and metal finishing, we had vibratory deburring in that facility. Awesome. And so in some ways, that visit sparked my interest, at least an interest in manufacturing, to have it on the radar. So how do we get students excited about it? We present it to them in a really age-appropriate, grade-appropriate way when they're in elementary school, learning about careers, maybe doing a project, maybe visiting a facility and getting them excited. I would say in much the same way for educators and those who are advising students, it's all about exposure. A lot of people working in education, and I was in manufacturing before I came into education. Lots of things I didn't know about education until I got to the education side of the ledger. Well, there's a lot of things that maybe folks don't understand about advanced manufacturing, how advanced it is, how automated it is, how these have become technology careers in many, many ways. And so I would suggest to educators that aren't familiar, to career advisors and others that maybe aren't familiar, get out and meet with your manufacturer, invite them into the school, learn about what you're doing in your tech ed and your STEM programs, accept accept their invitations to learn about their technologies, to meet with their employees, to meet with their teams, to understand the careers. Really, really important. And of course, for any of those folks in any of those categories, listening to the Tech Ed podcast on a regular basis isn't such a bad idea either.
So it sounds like the touring of a manufacturing facility will be just as beneficial for the parents, counselors, and the teachers that are chaperoning that as kids going on it.
For sure. I mean, there's a lot of paradigms that people have about advanced manufacturing that have changed a lot, right?
Yeah.
As we say, and this is even 10 years ago, we're like, look, these aren't the careers that your grandparents or even your parents had. Not to say that there was anything wrong with that version of manufacturing, but it looks a lot different in the world of manufacturing today, and it looks a lot more like a tech career than maybe a manual assembly or fabrication career did 20, 30 years ago.
Well, and shout out to your elementary school for doing that. I mean, I knew manufacturing because my dad ran manufacturing, so I was exposed to it. I got to go in, see the operation, see all the equipment, but that was only because my dad worked in it, and my school didn't offer that opportunity, so we're 1 for 2 on the Tech Ed podcast team. But
there you go. Yeah, well, Cost was a great example.
Yeah.
Regal Rexnord, actually, Rexnord at the time was another one that did a ton of outreach.
Oh, that's awesome.
I did a thing at State Fair Park where we went ice skating, and everybody got a Rexnord hat.
Oh, that's cool.
A stocking cap with their brand on it, and that I think was in 6th grade, and so that would have been quite a number of years ago and still sticks with me.
Yeah, because as a kid, there's nothing better than free stuff.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, exactly.
All right. Next question. This one comes from Sean Anderson over at B9 Creations. And Sean asks, what would you tell an 18 to 20-year-old who doesn't want to commit to 4 years at a university, but isn't sure how to find the right path forward? What opportunities are out there, and are there resources to help them sort through and determine what fits them best?
Yeah, this is a really important question, and I think the answer to it looks a lot different than it would 10 or 20 years ago, or even maybe 5 years ago. The first thing we tell young people, if it's an 18-year-old student, maybe somebody who's a senior in high school, is look, the decision you make coming out of high school, it's not a life sentence. Right? You're not going to be in the same career. Almost nobody is for their entire career. There are folks, I have members of my family that graduated from high school, got jobs in certain sectors and had the same job for 40, 50 years and then retired. That's not the world that we live in anymore. Yeah. The average person has 5 to 7, not just job changes, but entire career changes over the course of their career anymore. And so whatever decision you're making out of high school, there are no bad decisions, right? I mean, I suppose you could come up with some bad decisions, but whether you're deciding to go into the military, whether you're going on to a technical college, whether you're going direct to workforce, whether you're earning certifications, whether you're pursuing a career that requires a 4-year degree, and I think that's an important thing to think about. Those are all great options. It's a question of what is right for you as a young person. And so I would say, first of all, be open to a lot of those different options. If you're high school and you're still in high school, offers tech ed programs, STEM programs that have opportunities to learn about different careers, take advantage of that. A lot of schools will have work-share programs where a student might be going to school part of the day and then spending a little bit of time in the workforce. A lot of us had jobs in high school that exposed us to the world of work and let us understand a little bit more about what we like to do and about what we don't like to do. So all kinds of resources available. I would say, first of all, consider all your options. Meet with your military recruiter, spend time with the admissions folks at your technical college, same thing at your 4-year degree program if that's something you're interested in doing. Talk to local employers. Talk to your parents, talk to friends of your parents, ask them about their careers, be inquisitive, be curious, do your homework, and understand there aren't any bad decisions, that there's on-ramps and off-ramps throughout education and throughout your career. Maybe that wasn't the case 30, 40 years ago. It's 100% the case today. Learn about all your options and make the decision that's best for you.
I love the idea of talking to people who chose those different paths so you can get their perspective on I would have done this again, or I might have done something different.
Sure.
But, if you only ask, you only see what your parents did.
Yep,
you might only do what they did.
For sure.
Awesome. All right. Our next question comes from Brian Albrecht, who we have to give a shout out to because he was a 2-time podcast guest and just ubiquitous in the world of technical education. So always great stuff from Brian. And Brian asks, when thinking about a career, what are your top 3 things to consider?
Yep. Well, hey, Brian, great to hear from you. First of all, I will just say right off the bat, since we're highlighting Brian specifically, as I was moving from manufacturing over to education, and Brian knows this, and he's heard me say this a number of times, Brian was somebody that really helped me understand the world of education. He is a force beyond a force. He's a force of nature in education. One of my absolute favorite people, and took the time to mentor me and to help me understand education as I was making my switch from manufacturing. So always great to hear from Brian. 3 things that we should consider when we're thinking about a career choice. I think the first thing for me is always that, with kind of abridging the story a little bit, I think we've all got 2 or 3 areas where we can just play. If you've never seen the movie Good Will Hunting, there's a scene in that movie where Will Hunting is talking about how he couldn't play the piano to save his life. They were just white and black keys. But when it came to things like organic chemistry, when it came to complex mathematics, he could just play. He was naturally good at it. For me, it was always the things like finance and economics, were all things that just came naturally. For whatever reason, I just understood it when I was going to school. And then the communication side of things. I never knew all the English rules, but I could always sit down and just kind of write and make sense out of words. Those are my gifts. Others have other gifts, but I think we all have a couple areas where we could just play. I guess it's probably not surprising that I found my way into running businesses and hosting the #1 podcast in STEM and technical education as a result of those interests. So first, think about what you're naturally good at. The things that we're naturally good at tend to be the things that we excel at. The things we excel at are the things that we enjoy. The things we enjoy are the things that we tend to put more time into. And so it becomes a flywheel of sorts, is that you find things that you're interested in, you invest in learning about those things, you enjoy that, you want to learn more. The more you learn, the better you get at certain disciplines. And so it's really, really important to think about where are your natural skills. But it's not good enough to just think about that. I mean, you might be a natural athlete. Well, guess what? Very, very few natural athletes create a career out of playing whatever sport they're in. Doesn't mean you shouldn't follow that dream if that's something that's important to you and something that's possible. But the vast majority of us, myself included, as much as we may have wanted to be a professional athlete, that wasn't in the cards. And so thinking about not just what you're naturally good at, but secondly, where is there an opportunity for you to earn a living in whatever that is, right? So figure out your competencies and your skills and your aptitudes, and then look at careers that might align to those areas of interest. I mean, for me, I started my career in public accounting, again, with that interest in economics and finance. Probably not surprising. You find your way into something that you're good at. The third thing is, and by the way, something that has a career attached to it and one that will support the whatever type of life that you want to have, right? And so making sure that whatever compensation opportunities are available for you in that career align with what the lifestyle that you want to live over the course of your life, really, really important. And then you got to think about what educational opportunities are accessible to you in terms of pursuing that opportunity. I was a 2.8, 3.0 grade point average student coming out of high school. I could have wanted to be a doctor my whole life. I wasn't getting into med school, right? So understanding the reality of not just in terms of your grades, but in terms of how much debt you want to take on, how many years you want to spend in education, post-secondary, after high school, really, really important. So those would be the 3 things that I would think about. What are your natural skills and aptitudes? Number 1. Number 2, is there a career that aligns to that? And there always is. It's a question of finding it. And then number 3, what is the pathway to that career? And is that something that's reasonable for you to pursue?
That was great. I wish someone would give me that 3-step. I mean, we could just end the episode there. I mean, that's perfect.
But had somebody done that, then you wouldn't have found your way to the producer of the #1 podcast in STEM and technical education.
I would still be trying to be a professional athlete. Right. I still am. It's not working out well. Awesome. So last question for this topic of career advice, and this one comes from Nush Ahmed. And Nush herself is a young person who helps lead a lot of young women in manufacturing. So I love the perspective that she's bringing here. She says, when it comes to career advice, we, and I think she's referring to young people, always like having advice on interviews. So from the perspective of interviewers and CEOs, what stands out to them during an interview?
Yeah, awesome. Well, first of all, I have interviewed, like many, easily thousands of people. I mean, over the course of 30 plus years, first in manufacturing, now in the ed tech space, literally sat through thousands of interviews. So I would share a couple things. The first one is I analogize it, believe it or not, to selling a boat. So years ago, I had this big sailing yacht that I sailed on Lake Michigan, actually lived on it for a while. This was early in my career, 30 years ago, give or take, probably a little less than that. And it came time several years later to sell that boat. And so here's my analogy, and this has always stuck with me. I hired a broker to sell the boat. So in the same way you might hire a real estate agent to sell your house, I hired a broker to sell my boat. And he said, here's what's going to happen. He said, somebody's going to walk up to your boat. And in this case, it was a 30-foot yacht. We had it dry docked. So it was sitting, the deck of the boat was, 14 feet off the ground, something like that. And you could see the entire boat. He said, somebody's going to walk up to that boat. Mm-hmm. And in the first 10 to 30 seconds, they are going to make a decision about whether they like what they see. Is the bottom painted? Are the sides clean and waxed when they get up on the deck? If there's lines on the boat, are they neat? Is the deck neatly painted? When they get in the cabin, are things exquisite and perfect? And he said, literally within that first 10 to 30 seconds, they're going to make a decision about whether they like the boat or whether they don't like the boat. He said, if they like the boat, they will spend the next half hour to an hour finding things that reinforce that initial impression.
Okay.
And he said, if they don't like what they see, they will spend the next, probably not hour, but maybe 20 minutes finding things that reinforce that impression. And he said, what you want to do is present in that first 10 to 30 seconds a boat that everybody's going to look at and say, wow, this is just absolutely something beautiful. And they'll spend all their time reinforcing that paradigm. The same is true in an interview. I can tell you that whether it's a phone interview, whether it's a virtual interview, whether it's an in-person interview, those first 10 to 30 seconds are really, really important.
Okay.
Doesn't mean that if you blow those that you don't have a chance, but is the individual, first of all, are they dressed appropriately for the interview? A lot of people don't like to hear that, but if you're showing up for an interview in jeans and a t-shirt and, no socks and a pair of tennis shoes, that's going to leave an impression on that interviewer right off the bat. Doesn't mean that everybody's got to dress in a suit and tie for an interview, dress in a way that's appropriate for the role that you're interviewing for, but that first impression is going to be really important. Does the person look you in the eye when they're introducing themselves? Do they smile? Do they feel comfortable? If you're shaking their hand, do they have a firm handshake? And look, you're not looking for somebody to be a perfectly polished business person in any interview, but those first 30 seconds of making sure you make that great first impression, super, super important. The other thing that I would say is there comes a time in every interview where the interviewer says, do you have any questions? And I will tell you the first answer that can be toxic is no, I don't have any questions. Who doesn't have any questions? Who didn't listen well enough to the questions or think enough about the company or do their homework in advance enough to not have one question about the interview? The second one is to ask questions that are off-putting to the interviewer. Like you're going to have all the time in the world after you get an offer to negotiate salary, to understand benefits, to ask how much vacation, all these kinds of things. Forget all those questions in the first interview. Ask a deep question or two about the company, about your interest in the company, something that's going to advance that conversation, not a generic question like, what do you love about your job? That's fine. But ask a question that shows that you did your homework about the customers of the company or the organization, about their technology. A couple of those questions toward the end of the interview can super, super reinforce all the great things that happened over the course of the interview. So we could do a whole episode. Maybe we should. On interview tactics if you're a candidate for a job, but those would be a couple of things I would highlight.
That's really good. I love that. And I would say prepare. So like those questions, you can come up with those in advance to show that you did your homework, you looked at the company, you have questions about, you really looked into the opportunity at this company, have questions about it, listening really well so you're asking follow-up questions. And then to that first point, practice. Like find a friend or somebody in your network who you can practice walking into a room, giving a handshake, building that air of confidence so that when you go in, you're going to be really nervous for an interview.
Right, for sure.
And you're going to feel shaky. You're going to kind of lose yourself. But if you practice ahead of time, you'll have built the muscle memory and the confidence that I know how to do this. I know how to walk in, make eye contact, give a firm handshake, and nail this interview.
Yeah, I love that. In fact, back in my interview days, if I was driving to an appointment or I was in the middle, you just practice. Ask yourself a question, anticipate a question, and practice answering it.
Totally. Yeah.
Love that.
Awesome. All right. So we're going to change gears a little bit and we're going to talk a little bit more about the future workforce and how we get this whole idea of building more pipeline of talent, getting kids excited about careers in fields like advanced manufacturing. So the first question comes from Darren Castrova, who I feel like I have to call this out. That is my husband.
Yeah, love that too. Darren's an awesome guy.
He is. So a long question here, but I think it's a good one. So there's a few questions built in. I'll read the whole thing. What is industry doing right to attract talent? What could industry be doing better to attract talent? I see all the great things happening in the education space and all the partnerships that we've made at Pindell, but viable candidates are still few and far between. How can we affect the attendance to these programs? How can we help get more students into the great programs I see and then eventually on our doorstep? What sets the companies apart that are succeeding in attracting new talent?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. And especially coming from Darren, who I know, but our audience doesn't know, has a great career in advanced manufacturing, right? Found his way into advanced manufacturing. So this is a really well-informed question because it's the world that Darren lives in. And he's also a great example of somebody that started out in a role as a machinist and had an opportunity to advance through an organization and now in a significant position of leadership. So he's a great example. And I would say, let's start with that, let's tell us great stories of things that are happening in manufacturing. Let's talk about careers. Let's talk about how you're not, if you take an entry-level role in a manufacturing company, the sky's the limit, right? I can tell story after story of people that started out either in an entry-level role or maybe got a head start at a technical college or through a certificate program in manufacturing and ended up running the company or owning the company, or perhaps just had a good family supporting job in a role that they had for years and years and years. But the opportunities are endless in manufacturing. We need to make sure that we're telling those stories. So what are organizations and companies doing right? First thing I would say is that we've made a lot of progress here in the last 10 years. I wrote a magazine article for Gardner Business Media 10 years ago talking about all the things that manufacturers should be doing. We'll touch on some of those here in just a minute because most of them weren't. A lot of people in manufacturing were sitting back, pointing the fingers at their high school, pointing the fingers at their technical college and saying, if those people were only doing their job, we'd have a whole host of candidates sitting at the front door of the manufacturing facility. And then you walk into the facility and it's maybe not cutting edge technology. It isn't clean. They can't share examples of people who have advanced through the organization. They don't have a culture of training and upskilling and retaining their talent. So then you'd say, well, wait a minute, doesn't manufacturing have a significant role to play here? And the answer is yes. I would say the companies that are doing this well are doing a handful of things. First of all, they are humbly going to their educators and sitting down at the table and admitting they don't know everything about education and talking with educators who are admitting they don't know everything about manufacturing. And they're starting dialogue about what challenges are education people finding. There's just a lot of things in the world of manufacturing, like being able to make a decision on Monday, implement it on Wednesday, and see the results on Friday. Education doesn't work that way.
No, it does not.
And you can't expect it to, and it can't, because in some ways we have to have guardrails and some restrictions in terms of how quickly we can innovate to make sure that we're doing it in a way that's really, really thoughtful and really, really intentional, and is also kind of playing along with all the rules in education. But have those conversations with your educators. Be super, super engaged. Make sure when you're inviting students in to see your facility, and you should be doing that it's clean, that it's organized, that people look like they're excited to be there, like they're happy, like it's the kind of career that folks would want to spend their entire career at, or at least the next several years of their life at, that it's an organization that's committed to its culture, that understands what its mission is, that understands what its vision is, that understands its core values, not just as something that put on the wall, but something they live day in and day out. I think those kinds of things are really, really important. And then it's just a question of how engaged can you be with wherever your potential workforce is. And I'll give you an example. Several years ago, this was when I was still in manufacturing. I was recruiting welders for one of our manufacturing facilities. And I went to our local technical college and did a presentation to the entire cohort, in fact, several cohorts of welding students, and talked about the great careers that are available at our company. And I gave them my contact information and said, we'd love to talk to you if you're interested in a career with our company. And I went back and waited for the phone to ring, and it never did. And then at the end of the semester, I went back to that instructor a little bit disappointed and kind of frustrated and said, I didn't get a single call from one of your students. And he kind of laughed at me and he said, well, and you won't. He said, the people, first of all, half of our students, if not more, are already employed or committed to an employer while they're in the program. He said, secondly, the companies that are getting the students are super, super engaged. They're not just showing up and doing a little presentation once a semester. They're serving on our advisory board. They're serving on our foundation board. They're involved with our district board. They're coming in and talking to the students all the time. They're hiring our students regularly. They're bringing in pizza on a Tuesday for the students to spend a little time meeting them and talking about the great careers. In many cases, they're employing the students before they're ever graduated. Those are the kind of things that cutting edge companies do to attract the best talent. And it's not a short game, right? We get a lot of companies that say, look, I got to fill all these positions by the end of summer. What should I be doing? Well, we should be talking about what you should be doing 3 and 5 years from ago. But if you want to have success 3 and 5 years from now, these are the things you should be doing today.
Fantastic. Now I'm going to flip the script with another question, but this time that's coming from an educator, so different perspective. And this is from Andrew Melvin, who's at Capital Area Career Center. And Andrew asks, the biggest challenge we face is having major companies seeing our graduates as legitimate candidates for skilled positions. They come to our lab, they see the amount of training the students get and the knowledge they have, and not for lack of trying to get the flames fanned, we never hear from them again. My students are walking away with industry certifications, and the response always seems like, that's interesting, but they're still teenagers.
Yeah, well, first of all, keep the faith and stay at it, right? Because this is a long game too. In the same way that employers are playing a long game in terms of attracting talent, this is a long game in terms of getting employers interested in your talent. Let's talk about this in terms of sales terms and sales strategy, right? Because this is what we're trying to do in this case. And I'm not saying that a student is a product, but we're trying to sell a student to potential employers. And what we're running into is an objection. And that objection is, if I'm reading between the lines of the question, these students aren't ready for careers in advanced manufacturing, right? So that's the perception of the customer, which is the company that we're trying to sell these students to or get them interested in employing our talent. So with any objection in sales, we first have to take a look at, is there some basis of reality in that objection, right? If we're talking about students that are graduating from a high school program with certifications and are workforce ready when they're coming out of that program and they're not getting hired, why would that be? Think about it from the employer's perspective. You're hiring an 18-year-old student, right? We all remember what we were like when we were 18. Some of us more decisive than others, but that can be a really transitional period of time. So these employers are worried about, is this student going to have the maturity level to work in a manufacturing facility? Are they going to be able to work safely? Am I going to provide them a job where they're just going to learn some things from me for 6 months and then move on to another job? Is this a situation where they're not really prepared to come to work every day, to work hard, to have the level of professionalism that is required in a manufacturing or an advanced manufacturing environment? Those are the objectives objections, I should say, that we're getting. What we tell people in the sales world is think about those objections before you get them. The best thing that you can do is to address those objections before somebody ever raises them. If you know that's a concern or a seed of doubt that is in the brain of that manufacturer in terms of whether or not they're going to hire your students, address it up front, acknowledge it up front. Say, look, I get it. These are 17, 18-year-old adults, but some people look at them as kids. And some of the concerns you're going to have as a manufacturer is, are they going to come to work every day? Are they going to be able to work safely? Are they going to be professional? Are they going to be committed long-term? Let's address those right out of the block. So let's talk about where we have taken the time in our curriculum, in our coursework, to prepare them with the right workplace skills. Let's talk about where we have prepared them to work safely. Let's talk about where they've maybe had some work-based learning already and have been successful in an industrial environment. And the more that doubt we can take away from that employer, the more likely we are to be to convince that particular individual that our students are worth employing. The best way to do this is what we call feel found, or talk about an employer that already employed one of our students and did it successfully. Talk about that company, talk about the student, talk about the outcomes and how great it was. So if you have examples of students that have left your program and have been successful in manufacturing, sing those students' praises to the high heavens, because we want everybody to know about those great things. The other thing to tell the employer is to say, look, there aren't any guarantees, and I can't guarantee that the student in 6 months or a year isn't going to decide that they want to do something different. I can't guarantee that they're going to be perfect every day. But if the biggest challenge that manufacturers have is finding skilled talent, they have to be as open as possible to finding it in every possible space. And one of those great places is from students that have gone through certification programs in high school, have the requisite skills, have been trained how to work in the workplace. These are individuals, first of all, that are going to be accessible to you. And second of all, and this is the big selling point, they won't have any bad habits. One of the best things about hiring young people is that if you hire the right young person, you can put everything in front of them. You can put the impossible in front of them. They don't have any paradigm for what's impossible. And so because of that, they'll go ahead and give it everything they have. If you've got somebody that's been in the workforce for 10 or 20 years, they've been through the ringer a couple times, they may not be as eager to take on something new. Fresh talent right out of high school, you can put anything in front of that student or that young employee and they will take it on. So I would say let's look at the positives of hiring young people as well. Great question.
Awesome. Wow. Some great conversations around education and the future workforce. We're going to pivot now and talk a little bit about one of the most popular topics of 2025, artificial intelligence.
Hey,
yeah,
love
there we
that
go. So our very first question submitted around the topic of AI is from Danny Murphy, who is a mechatronics professor over at Central Virginia Community College. And Danny asks, it seems extremely likely that much of our education structure is about to be replaced with AI. Those of us who use AI routinely are quite aware of its pitfalls and limitations as well as its benefits. How do you expect this to impact the development of advanced manufacturing, safety in factories, and the momentum of humanity overall?
Yeah, I love the AI question. I think I would start with Danny's premise, and great to hear from you, Danny, and a great question. The idea that we are going to replace educators with AI, I think I would use the term disrupt as opposed to replace. In the day and age of artificial intelligence, the role of an educator is more important than ever. The role of somebody taking a personal interest, a human interest in an individual student, showing them they have a skill they didn't know they had, a competency or an aptitude that they didn't realize, a career direction that maybe they hadn't even thought about. That is going to be more important than ever, and humanity and human relationships in the age of AI, I think, are more important, not less important. That doesn't mean that education isn't going to be disrupted. It is going to be disrupted considerably. And so when we think about artificial intelligence, I think you think about it in a few different lanes. The first one is, what does education look like in the age of artificial intelligence? That's where I think tech ed and STEM is really prepared to shine. We talk about in AI, it's all about what it's going to be about now is applied learning. That we used to go to school to learn and go home to practice, do homework, essays, study for exams, and so on. And now that's going to be flipped. We can learn from anywhere. We can learn on YouTube. We can learn on TikTok. We can learn from e-learning. We can learn in a classroom. The ways to gather information and meet every learner where they are infinite. And so students are going to learn all kinds of ways. What they're going to need is more opportunities to practice what they're learning, to go in and do applied learning, to do hands-on learning, to talk about not just what they read, but the meaning of what they read or how it applies to something else that maybe they've done in their coursework. We're going to see way more group projects. We're going to see way more opportunities for students to go through training courses where they're not just learning technology, not just learning competencies, but they're putting those competencies to work as if they were in the workplace. We're going to see way more work-based learning. And so that's the world that we're going to live in. If you're in certain disciplines, we won't pick on any of them in education, but we can think of what they are, where it's typical classroom learning. I think that's where the risk is. In STEM and technical education, anybody that can provide applied opportunities for students is going to be way, way ahead. I think we're in for huge disruption in the world of education in the next 5 to 10 years. I think it's a really good thing, but it's going to be incumbent on educators to really be able to transition to this new world of education, to be open to it, to understand it, to recognize that they're not going to be the experts on everything, that students are going to have all kinds of ways to do research that they didn't have 5 and 10 years ago, all kinds of ways to study, all kinds of ways to do their coursework, and we have to morph education to that. I think it's really exciting, but it's not going to come without a fair degree of change.
Oh, and that's a great segue into the next question. And this question is from Brad Curry. Brad teaches engineering technology. So he's a tech ed teacher over at Richland Community College. And he's got an example of, hey, this is what we used to do in our classroom, and AI looks like it's disrupting that. So how do I need to change that? So here's his question. How do educators keep students from using AI to, quote, shortcut instead of learn? As a teacher, I assign an article review from a trade publication like Modern Machine Shop. Students are supposed to read an article that interests them and then write a one-page review. As a student quickly finds an article, they feed the right prompts into AI, they get back a one-page review, they copy it, paste it, and then they turn that in. The article hasn't been read and neither has what AI wrote. So what learning has actually occurred? And how has this helped the student achieve anything other than using tech to manipulate and shortcut their learning? So that's the question. And then there is a follow-up part 2, which I think is what we're really trying to get at here, is how do we use AI to help with actual learning and mastery?
Yeah. So the first part of the question, we're all going to be facing that. I saw a meme the other day, and we've all seen it, right? Where a student submits an essay for an assignment in a class, and the first line of the essay is, absolutely, I'd be happy to write you an essay that is written in the tone of a 4.0 student in a freshman college program, right? I mean, and obviously they just copied that right out of ChatGPT and pasted it into the answer. So the truth of the matter is that a couple realities. Number one is students do have AI available to them, whether it's generative AI. We kind of classify sometimes or lump all of AI into things like Perplexity, ChatGPT, Claude. It's way broader than that, but for the purposes of the question, that's a tool that's available to students. Trying to keep students from using it to do their coursework is a fool's errand. If you see the technology and the creative ways that students are finding to get generative AI to write in their own voice, it's impossible to police. We shouldn't even bother trying to do it. And frankly, nor should we. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily a good idea to preclude students from using the technology that's available to them, whether it's in the classroom, at home, or in the workforce, in doing their coursework. I think the question is, what does education have to look like in the age of artificial intelligence? And maybe rather than, love Modern Machine Shop, by the way. I write magazine columns for the company that owns Modern Machine Shop, Gardner Business Media. Love that publication. But rather than saying, pick an article and then write something that's interesting to you and having a student use generative AI to do that, maybe a way to do it is, hey, let's have everybody read the same article and not write anything. But let's come into class tomorrow and we're going to spend the first 15 minutes talking about what we as individuals learned from that article and responding to what our teammates or other people in our class learned from the article and having a conversation about that. And what happens then is now I'm putting the student on the spot to say, number one, you're not going to use generative AI. You can't react in real time. You could, but if you're sitting in a classroom, you can't react in real time using generative AI to something somebody else said in the classroom. Listen to a classmate say something and then respond to that. So I think this is really kind of portends a little bit the change that's going to come to education, which is, you can't just write an essay using ChatGPT and expect a student to learn anything because they haven't learned anything. We're going to have to change the way of learning. How does AI change the world of education? I think a lot of ways. We talk all the time on this podcast about the myriad learning styles that individuals come to education with, and that we don't all learn the same way, that some of us are hands-on learners, some of us learn by listening, some of us learn by reading, some of us learn in e-learning platforms, some of us learn listening to a lecture. All different ways of learning. Well, in the age of artificial intelligence, we have the ability now to look at every aspect of a student's performance, whether that's what's going on at home, what extracurricular activities they're interested in, what coursework they've excelled in the past, where they've struggled, what some of the challenges are they've had in the classroom. I mean, all this data is available to us in education. We can use AI to create large language models to say, all right, for this specific learner, what is the best way for that student to learn? And then specifically cater the learning opportunity to that student. We can have way more asynchronous learning, where one student who may need a little bit more time to understand a concept has the time to do that. Another student who is growing through that concept really, really quickly has the ability to move on to whatever comes next without being slowed down by another student in a specific course that may be taking a little bit more time to grasp the concept. And there's nothing wrong with needing more time, but let's not rush the student that needs more time and then hold back the student who might be excelling in a specific course area. In the age of AI, in the age of asynchronous learning, there's all kinds of ways that we can bring that learning to the student. I think it's really exciting. The other thing I would add to that is just the whole idea of applied artificial intelligence. What we talk about is the edge to cloud continuum, understanding how AI manifests itself in every market space, from hospitality to retail to manufacturing to defense to energy. Every single manufacturer, every single sector within our economy has sensors and devices on the edge, control systems, and then the cloud-based computing software that is helping predict the future, making decisions, and so on, helping students understand how that manifests itself in every market space. Really, really important, and we can use AI to do that. And we can also expose our students to artificial intelligence in an applied fashion so that they're ready for whatever comes after that level of education.
So, Matt, this is a lot. We're disrupting education. That's a lot that we're asking educators to do and to learn. And everything that you said sounds really exciting, but it also sounds really, really overwhelming. And we actually have a question kind of on that topic. This is from Casey O'Brien. And Casey says, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how educators can stay current and effective. As technology evolves faster than textbooks or even certifications can keep up, what practices have you seen that help educators stay on top of key tech developments and bring them meaningfully into the classroom? There's also a lot of tech noise out there. What's your advice to educators for filtering out distractions and focusing on tools and trends that truly matter in industry?
Well, in answer to that last part of the question, I would say talk to industrial employers first and foremost, right? Have great partnerships with your employers in whether it's your school district, whether it's in your technical college district, what have you. Getting out in the field, externships are a great opportunity. There's a lot of employers that'll bring educators in to learn about trends that are taking place in their operations. And so having that open dialogue, listening to your advisory board, if you have one, that's a really, really important aspect. So be engaged with the industry. They're not going to have all the answers either, but together with education, I think the more dialogue that we have, the better the connections, the more we're going to be able to gear learning toward what's happening in industry, particularly today as technology is evolving as quickly and as rapidly as it is. So I would say to Casey, first of all, make sure that you're spending time with those employers. I think the second thing is to acknowledge that we're not going to be experts in all this, right?
Yeah.
I mean, educators got really used to being a subject matter expert in a specific area. I'm a history teacher. I'm a social studies teacher. I'm a STEM teacher. I'm a physics teacher. I'm a math teacher, whatever. And they could go really, really deep in that one area. I think we're not going to be able to be subject matter experts across the board on everything. We're going to have to be subject matter experts on how we can introduce our students to the tools that will be helpful for them to learn. How do we do that? Well, the first thing is there's all kinds of great education organizations all over the country. You and I, Melissa, attend probably between us 50 different educational trade shows or conferences. They all have great keynote presentations. They all have great breakout sessions about changes in education and education philosophy and technology. Don't go to all those. I would not suggest to an educator that they go to 50 trade shows a year. The truth of the matter is that their schedules won't accommodate that. But pick two that are super interesting to you. And if you're into education technology, there's tons of organizations that are focused on education technology. If you're into STEM, tons of organizations there. If you're into applied learning, tons of organizations there. Pick a couple that are most meaningful to you, and also do it in the modes of learning. And in as much as we want to make sure that we're targeting our students in their learning style, do it in a way that's appropriate for the learning style of the teacher. If you're a hands-on learner, find an externship. If you're somebody that loves listening to lectures and presentations, go to a trade show where they've got great breakout sessions. Watch TED Talks, get on YouTube and find videos that are relevant to you. I think the key is to carve out some time every day, whether it's a half an hour or an hour, and focus on your own personal development.
Yeah.
Find a topic that's interesting to you, find a medium that is interesting to you, and then make sure that you've got the discipline to stay on top of it.
And if you want to know all the latest happening in AI and technical education and STEM, just subscribe to the Tech Ed podcast.
If you listen to us for an hour every week or whatever it is, I mean, imagine how far ahead.
I know you'd never need anything else.
Exactly. That might be a little bit of an exaggeration.
Maybe just a little bit of an exaggeration,
yep.
But a great place to start, and to hear about all the great people and organizations that you can tap into who are doing great, because that's our
100%.
goal. Share those stories. All right. One final question. It is on this AI topic, and this one comes from Buckley Brinklin. And Buckley says a year ago, this was now at August 2024, you published a report touting Wisconsin's potential as a leading AI region. How are we doing? Are we still leading?
Yeah, great question. And so to turn the clock back, it's about a year ago, a little bit more, our media company, the Tech Ed Media Group, spent an entire summer doing research in the state of Wisconsin, looking at trends in artificial intelligence, what educators were doing, what employers were doing. We did a huge survey of people in every single sector, whether it was healthcare, education, manufacturing, and so on, finance, and really looking at and understanding how AI was transforming those industries, and then talking about ways that our home state of Wisconsin was leading and could continue to lead in the world of artificial intelligence. So in terms of examples of leadership, drawing Microsoft, we had in an earlier episode, we'll link up in the show notes, Mary Snap, the Vice President of Strategic Initiatives for Microsoft, of all places, joined us on the podcast, talk about their $3 billion investment in a data center here in the state of Wisconsin. We talked about having the first baccalaureate degree program in artificial intelligence anywhere in the country. That was at the Milwaukee School of Engineering. We talked about having the first AI-based technical college degree anywhere in the United States, and that was at Waukesha County Technical College.
Yep.
The Emerging Technologies Lab I would point to in Whitehall, Wisconsin, doing amazing things and teaching K-12 students about the applications of artificial intelligence. So we were just leading in so many ways. Great things happening at places like Titletown Tech, at the University of Wisconsin Connected Systems Institute, the Marquette University, Northwestern Mutual, and UWM Connected Systems Institute. We talked about the new data science program, recently just expanded into a beautiful new building at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Wisconsin is in many ways leading in artificial intelligence. A big reason for that, as Buckley certainly knows, is our concentration on advanced manufacturing. 70% of all innovation, according to Ashutosh Patti's book, Ashutosh Patti, of course, being a senior managing director in charge of all the strategy for McKinsey, one of the largest consulting firms in the country, actually in the world, wrote a book called The Titanium Economy. 70% of all innovation across every sector of the economy happens in advanced manufacturing, believe it or not, and we have a huge concentration of advanced manufacturing. In answer to Buckley's question, I would say we are definitely still leading. There are all the things that we're talking about are continuing to gain momentum. There's more and more discussion around AI education. There's more and more discussion around getting people excited about how AI is going to change their workplace. We're not on the verge of the Midwest Manufacturing AI Summit, which is happening in association with WIMTS. Not anybody doing anything as broad as that anywhere in the country. But the truth of the matter is that that leadership position isn't going to last forever. And you see funding happening all over the country. Certainly the big tech companies on the West Coast are getting significant amounts of private funding. The state of Pennsylvania, significant amounts of public funding around advancing artificial intelligence. Manufacturing institutes being stood up outside of Wisconsin related to artificial intelligence. So the truth, Buckley, is we've got to keep our edge. And we have to keep doubling down as we have for the last several years here in the state of Wisconsin on the future of artificial intelligence. I think we can continue to lead, particularly because we have such a huge concentration of manufacturing, and manufacturing is going to lead on AI. But it's not going to happen on autopilot. We need great people like Buckley, great organizations like the Tech Ed Media Group, great megaphones like the Tech Ed podcast, and just as importantly, great advanced manufacturing companies, technology companies, and educators to continue to excite people about the next generation of STEM and workforce talent as it relates to artificial intelligence. So lots of great things on the horizon, lots of great things that we're doing, but we can't stop and take a breath. We got to keep the hammer down and stay after it.
And I would just say, too, if you're someone who's in a region outside of Wisconsin, you're on the East Coast, the West Coast, you're somewhere in the South, and you're like, I don't know, I think we're doing some pretty cool stuff in AI. We want to hear about it. I would love to see what people in other regions think about the investments that your region is making in artificial intelligence. Drop us a line, shoot us a message, and say, hey, here's what we got going on, and maybe we'll even share out about it on the Tech Ed podcast.
Yeah, exactly. If you're actually that good, then maybe you will find a way to be a guest on the Tech Ed podcast. But without question, we would love to hear from you. So, Melissa, awesome job asking those questions. Absolutely. As we're wrapping our time here on the Tech Ed podcast with this, the first episode of Ask Us Anything. I had a lot of fun on this episode. I hope our audience found it interesting. Keep cranking in those questions. So reach out to us and let us know what questions you have. We would love to hear from you. And whether you're doing that via email, whether you're going to the website, techedpodcast.com, whether you're reaching us on social media, which you'll find us everywhere on Instagram, on TikTok, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, wherever you go for social media, you'll find the Tech Ed podcast. You'll also find the show notes for this episode, all the great references that we made in a summary of the episode at techedpodcast.com/askUsAnything. So we'll make that simple, techedpodcast.com/ and then one word all together, Ask Us Anything. And that's where you'll find the show notes. You'll find us here next week on the next episode of the Tech Ed podcast. Until then, my thanks to our partner, Melissa Martin, for doing a wonderful job posing those questions and responding to them. Thanks to our audience for the great questions. And thanks to our listeners for being with us here again this week on the #1 podcast in STEM and technical education. I'm Matt Kirchner. Thanks for being with us.